Welcome back in, everybody, to Birds 365. Mike Gill is in our green room coming up in just 30 seconds from now. Before I do that, I want to welcome Eduardo and John, who dropped us a $5 super chat. He's going down to Brazil. He says, y'all send me a little prayer today. I'll be making my way to Brazil. And honestly, I'm excited. Nothing like watching football in a football country. I love it, Eduardo. Appreciate you being here, brother. Appreciate your support of the channel. I'll send you a prayer up so you travel safely down to Brazil and enjoy that Eagles game on Friday night. Hopefully we get the win versus the Packers. Let's welcome in our man, Mike Gill from 97.3 ESPN down the shore. Mike, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Hey, good morning, guys. What's up, man?
Hey, Mike, real quick, it was my fault, so it's my mistake, BLG. I double booked Mike Gill. You know what that's like. I imagine it's happened to you once or twice. I blame it on fat fingers. I just said 8 instead of 9.
Hey, my invite comes live on the air, so
yeah, that's true.
It's no fat fingers there.
No fat fingers. No, well, you're normally our 8:20. Brandon Lee Gouton normally comes on at 9:20. Typically most Wednesdays, and I just hit 8:20 when I was texting him. But yeah, you were the correct one. I meant to book you for 8:20. I meant to book BLG for 9:20, but I booked him for 8:20.
Gotcha.
I said yes. So
do you want me to leave?
No, he's already back. He normally does 9:20. So gotcha. I'm just saying it's my fault. I'm trying to take accountability like Nick Sirianni preaches.
Gotcha. Well, Nick Sirianni preaching accountability will be a theme this year, I guess, right? Everybody's going to be kind of paying attention to that as we talked to John yesterday about, how big this game is. And if they don't look good in this game Friday night, a lot of questions will probably go to accountability and Nick Sirianni. I would imagine he will be the guy, if they don't look good Friday night, that's going to get most of the ire of the Eagle fans.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're probably right, Mike. And that's it, because if they win and they look great, then it's going to be, hey, Kellen Moore is so much improved and Big Fangio, and Nick's just got to get out of the way. But if they lose, that's the life of a head coach, man. If they lose, it's all going to be on the head coach and to a certain degree, the quarterback as well. Always the head coach and quarterback. But it is, it's going to be tough for Nick Sirianni to get any positive reinforcement this year. Not that I think he's looking for it, but if they perform well, I think most people will assume it's the other guys, right?
Well, that goes back to, a question that I've asked a lot is, what was his role in the Super Bowl year? Like, do you give him any credit for helping them get to the Super Bowl at all? It's almost like people want to say that he had no role the first year when they made the playoffs, where they had no business making the playoffs, that his first year. Then they get to the Super Bowl. What role did he have in that? They were 10-1 at one point last year. Did he have any role in helping them get to 10-1? Those three things have to be considered when you praise and criticize Nick Sirianni and his role on this team. What factor is he in all of those successes that they had during his tenure? He's the only coach to make the playoffs his first 3 years. He'll try to make it 4 in a row this year. It'd be a huge disappointment if it isn't 4 in a row. So what role does he have in all of that is something I think gets lost in the sauce with him.
Yeah,
do you have an answer on that? Do you guys have an answer as to what his role is in?
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty good, in, it was his offense. And I've described it as, Shane Steichen and Brian Johnson picking something off the menu, basically. So they're given the menu, and then it's their job to pick the dishes off the menu, which is the play calling. And when it went well, it was obviously all Shane. And when it went poorly, it became some Brian Johnson, but more Nick Sirianni. And it's interesting because I was talking to, I remember during the whole downfall of Frank Reich in Indianapolis, it was funny because the people here would say, well, Nick's an idiot. He needs Shane Steichen. And the people there were saying, well, Frank, it was all Nick. It was all Nick. So it's just
Huh.
that's the way fans are. It's
Well, that's the way it was too with Peterson. They won the Super Bowl. It was Frank. When the
Yeah.
team struggled the next year, Doug needs Frank.
Yeah. And I remember Frank after the Super Bowl. I mean, Frank was, boy, his exact quote to me was, Doug Peterson is a flippin' star, because Frank doesn't curse, so he used the word flippin'. Yeah, but people believe what they want to believe. And in the case of Nick Sirianni, what's interesting to me is, Nick, and I've said it from the start, Nick really believes in his offense. And to this day, he will push back for people that, because the assumption, if the Eagles' offense is great this year, the assumption is going to be, Mike, it's because of the motion. It's because of the motion. Oh, they added in motion. Nick hates that. I can't even express it. To him, it's like so dumb and so stupid.
Well, Sirianni, it feels like the guy who has this like basic offense that just wins at the high school level all the time. You're playing a certain team and this is what they run, and try to stop it. And they don't do anything differently over a 25-year period. And he just believes in the principles. And that's where it feels like he is with this. Like, he believes in the principles of what his offense is, as simple as it may be. If we just execute it will work.
I think that's the framework, and it really started to help the quarterback. Like, I don't think he came in. In fact, if you go back to his first year, those first 5 games, completely different. They felt that when they were struggling, the whole point was they put too much on Jalen's plate too early, and that's when they scaled it back and they had the tremendous success. So I do think it becomes, all right, and Nick will tell you, in the 91-year history of the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe they're at now, they have never played better offensive football than they played in 2022, which I agree with. I agree with that sentiment. And the thought is that his offense hasn't changed. I think all you have to do is go back to Indianapolis and look at the difference between Andrew Luck and Jacoby Brissett and Phillip Rivers. It's constantly changing. He's trying to take advantage of the quarterback he has at the moment. Now, I think where the criticism is legit, you got to evolve. You got to keep evolving. You can't just say, I think the mistake last year was we were so good, let's just improve what we do and don't worry about anybody else. I don't think that works. I think that was the mistake, because you got to keep evolving.
Well, and as you said, in 2022, it might have been their best offense, but in 2023, they had essentially the same talent. Why was the offense a step back?
Couldn't pick up the blitz.
With the same personnel.
Same personnel.
Right.
But people were blitzing. That was the difference. Like, people.
And John, you don't think motion helps you pick up the blitz at all?
No. Pick up the blitz. Someone explain.
I don't know why motion would help you pick up the blitz. It might alter the coverage in some form, but
I'm just wondering, if you have a guy move, it might show you something that the defense is doing.
Well, that's the theory, but and that's where it all stemmed from. Phillip Rivers, one of the smartest quarterbacks ever, did not like motion because he wanted his keys from formational tricks. And that is where it stemmed from, and they came here and had success for it. Not everybody's the same. Maybe Jalen needs that to see what the coverage is, whereas somebody like Phillip Rivers didn't. And And that part's on the individual quarterback, but the actual mechanics of motion do not help with the blitz. That's about communicate. That's about understanding where the blitz is coming from, communicating with the receivers on in the moment, and getting the football in the right direction. That I mean, like what Zander, Mike, one of my pet peeves is, oh, you got to call a hot route. Nobody in the history of football has called a hot route. Think about that. Oh, it's 3rd and 13. I think the nickel corner's going to blitz. I'm going to throw a hot route behind the nickel corner. What are you, Karnak? I'm old. I'm going back to Johnny Carson. That's something you see on the field. So if you want to criticize the coaching staff for their inability to pick up the blitz, by all means have at it. But the criticism should be they have not prepared the quarterback properly to do it on the field. That's where the criticism should be.
The value of the motion, and look, people criticize Doug Peterson's offense for lack of motion as well. They won the Super Bowl. So some teams utilize it for matchup purposes. You might have a guy that's lined up on the out. You want to see if a team's running man. You want to see if they're running zone. You'll switch the receiver side of the field for a better matchup, to get a guy from the outside to the inside. There are reasons teams run motion. It's not a complete facade of this isn't doing anything. But generally, it's to kind of just look for, get different matchups. The Eagles did not run a lot of motion in 2022, and they went to the Super Bowl. They were a fumble.
Yeah.
They were a fumble away. Basically, Jalen Hurts doesn't fumble that football, they probably have won the Super Bowl in 2022. That Isaac Seumalo Hurts sequence there, it's probably the difference in them being Super Bowl champions again and us having a conversation here. They did not run a lot of motion in 2022. I think
they were bottom 5, Mike. They were bottom 5.
Yeah,
in 2022, they were bottom 5 in motion. Yes, yeah. I remember having this conversation a lot because people say, everybody's running motion. We're not running motion. You didn't run motion in 2022. You had the best team in your conference.
Well, here's why. Here's why people think motion. Well, everything's recency bias. So if you look at the top motion teams last year, 1 was Miami, 2 was the Rams, 3 was the 49ers, 4 was the Packers, 5 was the Lions. All great offenses, great teams. So everyone assumes, well, great offense, they use motion. If you think about it a little bit deeper, Miami Dolphins, Mike McDaniel, Los Angeles Rams, Sean McVay, San Francisco 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, Green Bay Packers, Matt LaFleur. The Shanahan offense, and if you hate Kyle, as most Eagles fans do, it's really Mike and Gary Kubiak. That's what works. That's what works. Play action's a big part of that, as well. And there, that scheme is the Vic Fangio scheme for offense. That's what everybody's trying to copy now because they're having success. And by the way, the same thing will happen when too many teams start to play it and too many teams start to copy it. And the Eagles are going to do a lot more like that this year. Then you have that tipping point, as you've seen with Vic's defensive scheme with the people. And then it becomes who does it best. It doesn't become unique. It becomes some do it well, some do it poorly. Like if you look at Green Bay with Joe Barry, they ran the Vic Fangio scheme very, very poorly. And that's why he got fired. Ed Donatel, very, very poorly, and he got fired. It becomes who does it best. not who does it because it's the best scheme. And I think a lot of it has to do with the coaching more than the actual motion. And Sean McVay, who's the guy, it's really Kyle, but I think because of Sean McVay being the sort of hot guy, I always joke, if you had a cup of coffee, you can get an interview in the NFL for a head coaching job. If you had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay, but
literally,
he literally calls motion the illusion of complexity. He literally calls it that. All he's trying to do is to test the discipline of the defense. And sometimes it works. And when it works, great. But it's not, you don't win because of motion. And that drives Nick Sirianni crazy. It really does.
Well,
He's
it also,
right.
it feels a lot like, we've had this conversation, it feels like it's one of those things where people don't really know what the motion is used for. It just wants to make you sound like you know something more than something else.
Somebody said that very well. I forget. You might remember.
Well, and we get into these things a lot. It's like, well, this team does motion and that team does motion and we're not doing it. Well, again, in 2022, we were better than all those teams. So if there is no definitive variable of why you're successful and why you're not successful.
Many different ways. And by the way, I asked Kellen Moore at his first press conference about motion, at his first press conference in Philadelphia about motion. And he admitted, well, I like it. My dad liked it. I liked it in college at Boise State. He does it because he likes it. Not because it's more success or least success. There's a bunch of different ways.
Right.
He's comfortable doing it that way.
More than one way to skin a cat is what they say.
Yes,
and I guess that's
skin a cat though.
I'm not actually doing that. Prince checks in. He says, we implemented RPO, which operates in a similar manner. The defense can't react quickly to the offense because they have to dissect it. I do wonder if the RPO had anything to do with the motion and teams adjusting to it. And then you add that to kind of counter their adjustments. Is that a fair read on it?
RPO is more of the replacement for the play action. It's just a different form of play action and really putting defenders in conflict is what that part of it's about. So we think about traditional play action like Kyle Shanahan, quarterback under center, dropping back, baking it to the running back. That's traditional play action. In the more modern spread environment where you're always in the gun or pistol, the RPO is about sort of replicating some of that putting the defenders in conflict more than motion. And then it becomes, Nick Sirianni would say, always says about Micah Parsons, if you can't block him, read him. That helps in that way as well, because there's certain defenders you can't block on a consistent basis, and you use that against them almost, and forcing them to choose between the quarterback and the running back in that conflict, and it helps in that matter as well. So that's more of what the RPO is about, I would say. But anyway, back to the Packers. This is a good team, Mike Gill, and you and I have talked.
Actually,
about...
I say you said this is a good team. I said very good team. They went 9-8 last year. By the way, they used a lot of motion in that 9-8 season.
Matt LaFleur.
But it's interesting. They don't have a receiver that's like in that upper echelon group. They brought in Josh Jacobs. Is Josh Jacobs still an elite back in this league?
Yeah, I don't get that. That's what I don't get that.
I thought they had
why they moved on from Aaron Jones. I
thought they had two good backs that fit their system well last year. We'll see. Maybe Jacobs still has another big year left in him. Those type of guys are always interesting when they change teams. How many times is a running back, now the Eagles have one here, obviously, picked up in free agency, how many times has that really kind of worked out for you where that running back comes in and it just has this big year? But we're talking about motion and things and the league's evolving. The last kind of big running back I can remember changing teams, like Marshall Faulk, when he changed from the Colts to the Rams, that really worked out well. But the running back changing teams a lot of times. But Jacobs, what kind of role in this offense? Because everyone seems to be excited about this offense because of Love and the three receivers. They have this depth at receivers, but they're not well-known receivers. They're not big-name receivers. Again, this team went 9-8 last year. This wasn't a team that was a 12-5 type of team. They kind of came out of nowhere in that playoff. So we're basing their success on really one playoff win and then a good playoff showing in a loss as to why this team has now kind of emerged. I think they have. I think they're pretty good, but are they being overvalued going into this year based on their playoff run?
I think they got a pretty damn good offense. I think defensively maybe, but I think they've got a great offense. I think Jordan Love. I mean, you talked about they don't have an AJ Brown over there in terms of caliber of receiver. Jordan Love had I don't know if you're a stat guy or not, but he threw for over 4,000 yards, 30 plus touchdowns. The guy had a good year, so I do think they're a good offense. It's definitely going to be a tall task for the Eagles, D.
I like playing a young quarterback who's had success early the next season because I think there's a lot of guys, and I think you saw some of this with Jalen Hurts, to be honest. I think a lot of guys think, and I went through this with Dante Culpepper. That's why I probably believe this when he had one of the best seasons ever, and he came back the next season and famously said, "Hey, the game has slowed down for me." And they threw a bunch of crap at him he never saw before. And it was not good, Mike Gill. I think a lot of young quarterbacks sometimes think, I got to figure it out. I got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come back and throw, and Vic's going to throw some crazy.
And not to mention, do you have the thought that you figured it out, and the team said you figured it out by giving you the largest contract in the history of the league?
I think that's something to keep an eye on, at least early in the season. Now, the good quarterbacks adjust, but that could be very helpful for the Eagles in week one, because I think Jordan Love's going to be a very good quarterback. And he had a tremendous second half of last season, but I do think you're going to have that short window where you think he's probably feeling himself a little bit, and maybe he thinks he's got everything figured out. Maybe not. Maybe he's the kind of guy who just keeps working. And
I only bring these things up not to say that I'm doubting them. I think they're going to be pretty good. And just say, look, they got a lot of players who don't have a long track record that we're putting a lot of stock into. The receiving core they have, Watson scored a lot of touchdowns. Reed's pretty good. Romeo. They've got three guys who are pretty solid, but none of them are you lining up at the fantasy football. Not that matters, but I'm saying they're not big name wide receivers.
No, but sometimes that works, Mike. I mean,
but in the case of Christian Watson, he's always hurt. But everybody knows that dude is a freak.
He's an amazing athlete. Yeah. Put it this way: they don't have a Justin Jefferson that you have to worry about where this guy is. And you have a secondary. I think that the Eagles feel like they've added enough depth to the secondary that this should be a really fun matchup. The young receivers on Green Bay, you got, Quinyon Mitchell, who's going to be making his debut. Rodgers hasn't played football in a year. So the Eagles, with their new configuration in the secondary against the depth of this Packers receiving core, that's going to be a really interesting battle Friday. And then, of course, I go back to Jacobs. How do they use him? How does he kind of fit into what they want to do offensively? And does he still have the same kind of giddy up that he had? He was an awesome play probably 2 years ago in Vegas. 2 years ago. Yards, 2 years ago in Vegas, he was really, really good.
I think it's funny. I don't know if I mentioned this on your show, Mike, but a lot of Eagles fans I've gotten this week is Josh Jacobs is washed. And he might be. Because he touched it 400 times that season you're talking about when he had 1,600 yards rushing. And last year he came back and, I don't know, averaged 3.5 yards per carry and certainly looked washed. from the standpoint. We've seen that happen before with running backs who touch it that much.
Yeah.
Most notably DeMarco Murray when he came to the Eagles and had nothing left.
Well, and that's what I talk about when the running backs change teams. It's usually because they got used and abused where they were, and then the team says, "Go ahead," and
but
it doesn't work out quite as well.
That's what the Eagles did.
I said the Eagles did it, so you have to take that as well.
Yeah.
You got to factor.
I'm like, Saquon's got a ton of touches. He's a year older than Josh Jacobs. He's actually older. He's got more touches in his career. And everybody's telling me this week that Jacobs is washed, but get ready for the Saquon show.
Hey, listen, it's got to be in the back of people's minds that now I think the whole Hard Knocks thing where you saw the dynamic between, Mara and the GM, Mara wanting Barkley to stay and that they couldn't let him go, and the GM saying, "There's no way I'm bringing this guy back. What are you kidding me?" So it is an interesting dynamic. Look, I think the Barkley thing was a surprise and a shock to everybody, but because he's coming to your team, and look, Barkley has the cachet of being the number 2 pick in the draft. He played at Penn State, was an amazing player in this region. So I think people are anticipating getting this player who was a second overall pick talent, as opposed, Jacobs was a first round pick, but not as well known throughout, to people. So you're almost like doubting him a little bit more. Whereas Barkley, he was the player. He was the guy who, you don't take a running back that high in the draft. So you think that there is more talent there. And then, of course, I'm watching the TV in front of me this morning right before I came on. Oh, he's better than Christian McCaffrey. He's going to have a bigger impact in the offense than McCaffrey does this year. And, John, I know you and I have talked about this on my show a lot, that you hear those comparisons a lot, that people look at Barkley as a different type of talent than they do Jacobs, even though they've had similar type of careers.
Yeah. And, I mean, Saquon's so interesting from that standpoint because I do think it's like when it, kind of crystallized to me watching him in camp every day. Like he's bigger and stronger and faster than most everybody. And that's a good thing to have. But like he's not as gifted when it comes to being in space as a lot of the other great backs. To me, it's all about his physical advantages, which is awesome to have. And other players have tremendous respect for physical freaks. And he's a physical freak. I don't think they have as much respect for the technicians. I don't think he's a technician, if that makes sense. But we'll see. Saquon show. But I find it interesting because people are telling me all week, oh, Jacobs is washed. He's 26. Barkley's 27 with more touches.
Now, Jacobs and Barkley both had big years on bad teams. What do they look like behind better offensive lines, I think, is in the equation here. And with better talent around them. I mean, Vegas did not have great offensive line play, quarterback play, or offensive line play during Jacobs' tenure. No, they don't have great much, and he was still able to produce. Barkley obviously had real bad offensive line play, but he had a lot of injury issues. So, look, the dynamics between the two of them are going to be interesting. Both players are coming into situations where they have quarterbacks and receivers that can be the leads on those teams, where the running back – the last couple of years for both those teams, the Eagles, you had Swift and Gainwell, and you had Sanders and Gainwell. Yeah. So you had kind of not committees type, but where the running back was not like the big star of the team. How do you fit these two guys who were the stars of their offense in previous stops into where they are now?
Moss, by the way, was pretty damn good in 2022.
He was awesome.
Yeah. I think people forget that. Did get hurt late in the season.
Interesting point about that, though. He was awesome here. 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, and, goes to Carolina. And 400 yards. I mean, just had no.
Well, the offensive line has something to do with it. There's no question about that.
That's my point. Is the Eagles' offensive line that big of a factor for Sanders to go from a 1,200-yard back to basically he got usurped as the starter, and they signed him for decent money to go play there, and now he can't get on the field.
Yeah.
It is interesting, the second team running back stuff, Mike. I mean, I think the Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell, remember when they put up their stink about getting their massive contracts and then boom, they were gone. It's like they didn't even exist in the league anymore. And when Todd Gurley was in his prime, he was unbelievable. When Le'Veon Bell, I mean, he was unbelievable in Pittsburgh. And then he holds out a year, gets the big contract in New York, and he's gone after a year.
I'm telling you, Zander.
It is interesting, man.
If somebody in the chat or something can think of a running back who switched teams, when the team was like, we're not re-signing you, because McCaffrey got traded, he got traded, not signed. But that someone signed as a free agent running back and went someplace else and became like a big factor inside. I can't really one doesn't jump out at me. I'm sure there's one or somewhere, but Marshall Faulk.
You mentioned, but I forget. That was a trade, right?
That might have been a trade actually. Yeah. With the Colts and the Rams, but that's one guy who changed teams and went to the other team and probably was better than he was where he was. I mean, Adrian James went from the Colts to the.
And that's a different era. That's a different era.
And that's a different era, right?
Yeah. Even Adrian Peterson, people were saying him too. That's another different era. That's too, James Conner's a decent one. He's with the Cardinals now, I think. And,
he's okay though.
Yeah, he's okay. Yeah, he's not elite.
Yeah. He's not difference making. It is interesting, the position as a whole. Le'Veon Bell was a perfect example of, I don't think I've ever seen a more patient runner than Le'Veon Bell. First of all, for people that forget, when he was in college, he was oversized, he was overweight, and then he got in great shape and turned into this great running back, and then he held out and it was over. He got his
money though, yeah.
Well, he never made it up, Hassan Reddick. You can't make it up.
He didn't do anything in post Steelers.
Nothing with the Jets.
Didn't do anything.
Nothing. And Todd Gurley, the same thing. Didn't he get paid somewhere massive after?
Well, he had some injury issues. With Todd, it was more injury issues, I think.
But that's part of it, John. That's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of the running back.
That's part of why the teams don't want to sign them, then bring them back, and they say, "Go ahead, go sign with another team," and then that team signs them, and they end up being the team that has to go through the injuries and the loss of a step and those type of things. So there's where Philadelphia and Green Bay are in that right now. Are their guys, have they lost a step? Are they too many injuries in their past? It's going to be a big storyline for both Saquon Barkley and Jacobs, two teams that brought in high-profile running back. I thought one of the biggest stories of this offseason, guys, was the free agent running backs that got paid. I mean, when does that happen? And the free agent running backs that changed teams. You had all these running backs on the market, and you're thinking, what are these running backs going to get paid? Some of them got paid pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and Mike knows this better than most because he and I have been on the same page for years with Howie Roseman, and I think Howie's and anybody who watches the show knows I think Howie's one of the best GMs in the NFL. You can debate who number one is at any particular time, but he's easily top 5, and he's usually closer to number one than farther away from number one. I think he had it right for years about the running back position. I think he's part of the reason the league shifted to their philosophy about the running back position. So I'm not going to turn around and do a 180 and then say, well, now he's got it right. From his perspective, he's zigging when everybody else is zagging. So he's trying to correct it. Maybe a market inefficiency that he helped create. And I get that thought process from a, analytical learning environment. But in the real world, I think he got it right at running back. How much, but we just brought up Miles Sanders. I think a lot of people forget Miles Sanders, not only did he have 1,269 yards that year, he was hurt at the end of the season and he was limited at the end of the season. So if he didn't get hurt, which is part of it, I get it. But then you're probably talking about 1,400 yards, 1,450 yards. You're getting way up there. That's how good Miles Sanders was that year. How much better could Saquon Barkley be than that?
I have said that over and over this offseason, John, is you got 1,200 yards from Sanders. You got over 1,000 yards from Swift. If I'm paying the running back the money I'm paying him this year, I better get more production than I got from those two guys.
But you think we're underestimating how much they valued the blitz pickup of Barkley? I know they didn't pay him for that, but think about all the conversation that's been had about Jalen and the blitz and teams knowing that the Eagles can't handle the blitz. You think maybe they sign it back that's going to give you similar numbers to Miles and DeAndre, and he can pick up the blitz? Are we underestimating that?
Mike, I'll give you my opinion.
Well, I mean, did they sign Saquon Barkley specifically for blitz pickup? No, not for 30.
Yeah.
No, but I think it'll be a telling sign if he's a big factor in helping. It'll be interesting to see how that all happens because it is unbelievable how bad they were at it at this level. And by the way, you're that bad at it, and you have Landon Dickerson, a Pro Bowler, Jason Kelsey, one of the best at his position in the last 15 years. To have the problems that they had with the level of offensive line they have is mind-boggling. So how much was the other team saying, look, this running back there has no idea what he's doing. Let's target him and go right through that gap because he's not going to be able to pick it up. I think we'll be able to find that out pretty early this year if the Eagles make those changes and you see Barkley stepping in there and picking guys off.
Yeah, I think it's.
But how much? I guess the question goes to John is how much was the running back's role or lack thereof a part of why they weren't able to pick up the blitz?
That's a good question.
Well, I think a decent amount, but I think there's I always say it with linebackers. I've gotten to the point where, people say, "Oh, you got to get coverage linebacker," and then I ask them their favorite coverage linebackers, and some come up with the right answers, but most don't realize how difficult it is for linebackers to cover in the modern NFL game. Certainly in space, I think that's the same thing. Is Saquon Barkley one of the best blitz picker uppers in the NFL? Yes. It's like the tallest short guy at the circus. Like nobody picks up the blitz anymore. Nobody picks up the blitz in college. That's where it stems from. They're not used to it. So he's pretty good at it compared to his peers. Is it difference making? Is it like the way it used to be? No.
Well,
where
maybe
guys
it's
are
the reason that you
stoning
go
guys.
Maybe it's the reason you go to that 12. Like DeAndre Swift got $8 million. Maybe you're like, I'll give 12 to Saquon because that extra 4.5.
If you're talking about why the Eagles signed him, blitz pickup is about 67th on the list.
Interesting. I thought it'd be higher than that.
Well,
I mean, I didn't think it was
exaggerating. I'm exaggerating for a fact.
I know you are. Yeah.
So I don't know that you could come up with a list of 67 things you want the running back to
exactly.
do.
So that's the embellishment part of it. But I don't think that's at the forefront. Although he is, again, compared to his peers, it's like tight ends. And they say tight ends. Now the thought is everybody says with tight ends, lose slowly because they know they're losing. Just lose slowly. That's sort of the same thing with blitz pickup. You're losing. I mean, if there's Saquon Barkley ain't Emmitt Smith in his prime. Like if you want to go back to old school guys who picked up the blitz every single time, they don't exist anymore. So is he going to be better at it? Yes. Is it going to be? Is it why the Eagles signed Saquon? No. not even remotely. That's like a little bit of, oh, and by the way, he's going to be better than the direct that you have had and everybody else has. So it can't hurt you. But I think if you watch a game and, well, Wink's no longer here and they don't play Minnesota, right?
No.
So, but if you had a Wink Martindale or a Brian Flores and they're sending guys 60, 70% of the time, is he going to pick it up every single? No. Especially if they have good blitzers. And that's just a modern. That's not even a criticism because I know everybody.
They should be better in that area.
Yeah, they should be better, which is good. It's good to get better, but yeah, I mean, tallest short guy at the circus. Tallest. Yeah, I mean, nobody.
Breaking news! I got some breaking news for everybody on the show right now. Devin White will be out for the Friday night game with an ankle injury. He will not travel.
He showed up on the injury report. Yeah. And another conspiracy theory, because a certain someone outplayed a certain someone. But you didn't hear that here, did you? Oh, you did. Consistently.
You hear everything here on Birds 365 if you're a loyal listener. Johnny Mack brings the heat every single day and gives us updates. And I always say, John and Mike, our listeners are some of the most educated Eagles fans in the country, in the world, because we have viewers from all over the place. Mike, last question, man. Thanks for
Hold on, real quick. So are they going to go with Bond and Dean?
Yeah, right.
Which was my prediction.
And that means Trotter Jr. will be dressed, right, John?
Yeah. Yes. Now, hey, N'Kobe's got to perform.
John, are you going tinfoil hat on this?
Oh yeah. But it's not even a conspiracy. I mean, this is how it should have been. I fully expected N'Kobe.
Yeah, but the whole Devin White not even going thing, he's got to be actually injured.
I saw him in the locker room. He was pretty happy yesterday. He was moving around pretty well. Now I'm not saying, as I always said, I said the same thing with James Bradbury, and I said the same thing with Anaya Smith. Look, they're NFL players. He's been playing a long time. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with his ankle. There's probably something wrong with his ankle. What I'm saying, the conspiracy part is they're taking advantage of a little banged up to put the guy they want on the field. And if everything goes smoothly, you're never going to see the Devin White era.
Wow.
Now, if N'Kobe Dean,
because you've been on my show saying you thought that Dean would take over for Bond eventually, I think, right?
Well, yeah, but I've shifted from it was White and Bond, where the Eagles went through the whole training camp, and I ultimately said it would be White and Dean together. But when the Eagles put out their first depth chart, it became White/Dean, the old college trick. You're a West Virginia guy. You know how college teams put together their depth charts. So when they don't have a clear starter, they use the slash. It became White/Dean, and Bond was by himself. So at that point, I shifted to, it's going to be N'Kobe and Zach Bond. And yeah, here we are. Now, again, if Zach plays poorly, if N'Kobe plays poorly against a very good offense, Devin White might be out there against Atlanta in week 2. But this is the opportunity. If they play well, they're not leaving the field.
The amount of people that have been criticizing John McMullen this offseason for his Devin White projections.
Hey, I was right there. I mean, again,
I'm going to be presenting
Mike
you
was
with
there. Mike understood.
I was
Mike
there.
Talked to a bunch of people in Tampa.
I was going to say, I talked to a lot of people in Tampa, and they were not very complimentary, let's just say, of White's play and his unwillingness to really want to learn and get better and just use kind of natural talents. And people start to see you on film and over pursue and not great in coverage and yada, yada. And you had a player in the last couple of years, who was not the same player as he was 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, John, is Nakobe going to play the mic and Barn at the will? Yeah.
Nakobe's going to have the green dot, and he should. And by the way, I got to see Nakobe in the locker room over the past couple of days. Remember, we're not in the locker room until first time we were in the locker room was Sunday. We don't get to go in the locker room during training camp any longer post COVID.
They never lifted that.
No, they lifted it, but we only when the regular season starts. So from the preparation standpoint, that would be Sunday, and that's the first time we're in the locker room. First time I saw Nakobe up close. Yeah, it's a locker room, to be blunt, with a tank top on, shirt off. Guy's jacked, man. He took it complete. So we were talking about his physicality, which is surprising because he's an undersized guy. Well, he took his rehab and he couldn't do anything with his lower body because he had list rank surgery. And he just built himself up in his upper body. And he's been out physicaling people all throughout the summer. Last 3 weeks, it was not close. Zander knows I've been saying it was not close when it came to the linebackers. It was Nakobe and everybody else. Now he's got to prove it against Green Bay, but he's the Eagles' best linebacker. So I wouldn't be wringing my hands if I were Eagles fans about this injury, even remotely. But that's me.
Mike, last question, man, on the way out. Got to get your prediction. So last time we'll talk to you before the game. We've talked all off season. We've analyzed this team through and through for the last 3, 4, 5 months. What's your thought going into week 1 here? Who gets the win? What's your score prediction for Friday night's game in Sao Paulo?
I kind of like Philly to win the game. There's been so much trepidation and all this stuff. It feels like one of those nights where they just kind of come out and almost calm everybody down, and then the overreaction will start the following week, and you'll start to hear the teams going to the Super Bowl. They looked awesome. So I think you're going to see a big offensive night with Kellen Moore's new offense. I think, remember the Chip Kelly night where they just went out and were unstoppable against Washington that night. I think you're going to get a big night. So like 35, 20,
a lot of points
somewhere in there. 35-22, Philadelphia.
I like it. That's bold. That's essentially a blowout in the NFL. It's not a college blowout, but that's a blowout. That's a good team. I'll tell you what, I do hope the Eagles win this game from the standpoint of I don't want to deal with this all season that they lost a home game and they lost to Green Bay, and that's going to impact them down the road. And the only way to stop that, Mike, is to win the football game.
Yeah.
Because if they lose it, that's going to be a narrative the whole season.
It feels very the way things have been going in Philly sports recently. You get the hot start, you go off to the good start, and then somewhere along the line, you kind of hit the cruise control.
Yeah, well, that part's true too, because if the Eagles start 10-1, people will be like, all right, let's wait and see.
Yeah. By the way, for the people asking, how do you get to 22? I don't know. There's 2-point conversions, missed point after attempts all over the place in this league. Yes. They got a new kicker down there.
They got a new kicker. Yeah.
They got a new kicker down there who, by the way, made every single point after attempt in his college career. And then in the preseason, he shanked one. So 22, I don't know. I just came up with a number that sounded like somewhere like they're trying to get back in the game, and you get to a weird number. So 22, 23, 24, somewhere in there, 35, low 20s for Green Bay.
I like it. Good stuff, Mike Gill. Appreciate you being here, man, on the show today. Good insight. Nothing like some breaking news coming on air. Yeah. Appreciate you being here, Mike. We'll talk to you next week. All right, man. Hopefully the Eagles are 1-0 by that point.
And at Mike Gill Show, 97.3, the Sports Bash, 2 to 6 every day. Listen to Mike there. Also, the official home of the Eagles in South Jersey.
That's right. You're down the shore, sitting on the beach. You can bring the radio and listen to the game on 97.3.
Good stuff, Mike. We'll talk to you next week. All right, man.
See you guys.
Thanks, Mike.
There's Mike Gill joining us on Birds 365. Johnny Mack, breaking news, man. What's your react? I know you kind of gave it with Mike, but I want to get it with just you here now on the show. John, I'll tell you what, man. I'm not gonna make a proclamation on Devin's whole season because of this, but I tell you what, if this guy does not contribute to this team like everybody expected this year, I better see Johnny Mack apologies in the chat all season long.
I agree with that, but I hope no one would care if Nakobe turns into the player I think he can turn into. But, I'm not going to say the Eagles aren't going to need Devin White. There's injuries, and we know Nakobe's injury history last year, so you need depth. But look, Nakobe's a better player. And he'll either prove it or he won't prove it.
Zach Bond, is he a better player too than Devin White? I mean, I'd rather have Nakobe and Devin. At least
I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty with Zach Bond because he's essentially, although he's played off-ball linebacker, he's played mainly on the edge. I think, and this is just speculation, I think he's trying to turn him into an Andrew Van Ginkel type player who can do both, as he used in Miami. And by both, I mean he can be an all-ball linebacker and be an edge rusher and have that flat defender who can go in coverage. And Van Ginkel did it at a very high level last year in Miami. And I don't know if it's realistic to think that Zach Bond could do it at that kind of level, but I think he wants that type of player. And I think he fits that mold. So it becomes, all right, I want him on the field for that role. And then it's just about middle linebacker. And then it becomes Devin White or Nakobe Dean. And I get why people in Philadelphia would want Devin White because of what went on with Nakobe Dean last year. I think people in Tampa would laugh at you. But they don't know about Nakobe Dean. So, it's basically, as I said, Nakobe has to prove himself. I mean, if he goes out there against Green Bay because I guarantee you, Matt LaFleur's whole game plan starts with taking advantage over the Eagles over the middle of the field.
Right.
I guarantee you. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for Nakobe Dean to screw up. And if he doesn't perform, like I said, you might see Devin White out there in week 2. But he's got a chance now. If you're on the field and you're performing well, nobody's taking you off the field.
Right. We're going to see what they end up doing at the linebacker position. Breaking news for anybody just joining in. Big crowd here. Appreciate everybody being here. Make sure you guys smash that like button. Birds 365 is live 8 to 10 every day, and we will be live all season long, Monday through Friday, covering this football team. Devin White has been ruled out and will not even travel with the team to Sao Paulo, Brazil. So he is out for Friday night. The first big guy out for the Eagles on Friday. So we'll see. I think that should be it, at least for now, but we will be following it all along. That means it's time for Nakobe Dean to step up and be that first linebacker for this team. We will see how it works out for the Eagles on Friday night versus the Packers in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Appreciate everybody being here. As I mentioned, drop that like. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll come back and talk to Brandon Lee Gowton, BLG of Bleeding Green Nation. Does a great job covering this team. It'll be good to get his insight on what he thinks about Devin White being out and his projections and preview of the Eagles versus Packers on Friday night in Brazil. Stay tuned, everybody. Birds 365 will be right back.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.